And again, hey,
Okay.
Rod, it's nice to meet you. We have never actually
I
met.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's true. We've talked on the phone, but
Yeah. The for veterans of my games, Rod is the artist who turned in a ton of great work for Troll Babe, which was featured in the first edition and also in the second. So a lot of that art I still use for promotion today, and also
oh
contributed a lot in the comic strip that we did. So
yeah, yeah.
yeah, and a few other pieces here and there as the years went by. So let's see. Here we are to do this very strange idea for a seminar. Maybe not too strange. I published Sex and Sorcery in 2003.
Mhm.
Sex and Sorcery was pretty influential. Anyway, so we can just jump into the real play. Rod,
Okay.
let's learn about your characters or any of your characters who may have done any such thing.
All right. Well, unfortunately, I have to be the tragic counterexample
Oh, no problem.
because I haven't had. Well, I played in two games in the last. I can't stop fidgeting with things.
Yeah.
Okay, I played in two games
Hmm.
in the last year. The first one, like last year, was a masks game that actually had sex came up as a like an almost it's a teen drama
I
type
was
thing,
gonna
so it
say
came
it's
up
a
as a
yeah.
is this going to happen or not. In this case, it was kind of this typical like teen superhero with a secret identity situation. I was playing the guy where like my character's girlfriend shows up, rented a hotel room, but there's also a supervillain on the
Oh, I
rampage.
see.
And
What was
so
the character's name, dare I ask?
uh I my character's name
Yeah,
was he was a matter controller named Kid Crucible.
Kid Crucible.
Yeah.
Um, awesome. I mean, the reason I bring that up, just besides the basic information, because tell me about your character, is
Right,
that
right, right.
I really think of Masks, and I'm sure there's more influences than this, but I really think of Masks as like the quintessential New Teen Titans
Yeah,
game. Very
yeah, no,
much, yeah. And so
that's textual in the book. It's
oh, that
all
makes
over the
sense then, because everything I've read about it is like, oh my goodness, it's like jumping right out at me, and that's great. But the reason I think of that is because that series, and I'm thinking of its real heyday, the Perez and Wolfman,
hmm Yeah, yeah,
and that series was so weird in that regard because,
right,
for example, you had a lot of people hooking up with characters outside the group.
right, right,
And they tended to be uh, well, but the point is that among the characters there was always this sort of belligerent tension that flared up and down and didn't really go
right, right,
anywhere.
right.
And so it was kind of like, well, we have all that stuff that could happen among the main characters, but let's keep dragging in characters from outside to sort of diffuse
Right,
that,
right.
all the time. Um, so basically, I presume that Kid Crucible decided to go and save the day instead.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So
Right.
he actually unmasked himself to his girlfriend in order to like have
To explain,
a
right?
sufficiently good
Right.
reason.
All right. All right.
Uh,
So
but
it's plot relevant though, is what we're saying.
plot relevant. Yeah,
Right.
it's plot
So the lack thereof might as well be the presence because it's like
right,
this
right.
plot relevant thing.
I mean, yeah, to
Mhm.
my mind, that was getting in the direction
Right.
of handling it in a good story way.
Sure. I mean, but what's kind of important to me is not just, I mean, I'm not really that interested in the sort of prurient, what have your characters
Right,
gotten
right,
up
right,
to? I'll tell you if you'll tell
right,
me,
right, right,
it's less a matter of, or it's more a matter of saying, look, this is a meaningful
life.
component
Yeah,
of all these genres that we're supposed to be all into anyway,
right, right.
and so, it's kind of it kind of reminds me of Jim Raji with Lamentations of the Flame Princess, who says, "Look, what I put in this book is no more than what you find in mainstream horror and
Right.
the edgier rock and roll anyway." It's not like I'm putting anything in here that you can't get in any other medium. You know, why is role playing supposed to be cleaner than anything else? I'm not
Right,
even
right.
being especially naughty or vile. Well, maybe a little naughty and vile, but pretty much in the realm. Although he does like to push it here and there. But
Yeah,
the thing I'm thinking is just to think of this in terms of presence as a piece
right.
of what happens rather than as a special thing that happens, right? Um, so anyway, cool. Who's next?
I don't have that much to tell. I think
Hmm.
I have gamed quite a bit, but not. There's been very little sex or sex-oriented things going on in that. There was one game where I was the game master, where it was more like a natural thing. Like one of the characters was a druid
Hmm.
in Dungeon World,
Hmm.
and she decided to distract one giant boar going around by being a female boar, and well, of
Well,
course, he was
look, yeah,
interested, and
it's Nordic, a very
things
Nordic
things
moment.
things
Yes,
happened
yes.
like they are almost happened, because and then it was curtains as the group was well, that was fine as far as it went. Um, but apart from that, not much happened in character way.
What are
Uh,
some of the game titles?
I played quite a bit of Traveler
Hmm. Hmm.
with which was mostly a bit of that was more trade and more
Trade,
Malaysian like
salvage, the odd
fair trade
gunshot. Yeah,
salvage, but a bit of, well, not quite piracy, but we wouldn't have minded if it came to it.
right.
And there's the regular game of Dungeons and Dragons, which is classic Dungeons and Dragons.
Well, hold on here. Who are we talking to? The
I know.
which publication are we talking? Proper citation. Citation needed, right? Yeah.
It was we were playing basic Dungeons and Dragons, so the old version of the 81.
Mulvey,
No, the one after, I think.
the like Menser.
One of the red box.
Okay. Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. That probably is the Menser.
I think that's Mentor.
Yeah.
I think.
It seems
Um,
like it.
and that play group isn't quite into all that much interpersonal things.
Right. Right. The Then that brings us to Gordon.
Right. And so we're restricting it to the last year, makes it a little bit. So one of the things that I've got going on right now is running a game, Pathfinder, for two friends and one of their 13-year-old son. So we've kind of stayed away from too much of that going on. I've played lots of different games with these two guys, and had all kinds of different stuff in terms of mostly a PC and an NPC. I've never really had a
Right.
lot of PC to PC contact that way. That for some reason that's just the way it has worked out.
I've noted that that's generally the case too. I had alluded to that
Yeah.
a couple of minutes ago, as if I had sort of thought. I mean, it might have been implied that I was sort of aiming in that direction as a topic, but I'm kind of not,
Yeah.
because
Right.
and it's not too hard to figure out why. But on the other
Right.
hand, I've noted that when it has occurred, uh, it's actually a pretty serious bond between the players. I mean, it's a pretty it's like up maybe on a par with, if I don't know if it's a par or parity or not. It's in the same realm as really preventing something really drastic from happening, bad happening to another player character.
Yeah.
Your character is still present in the game or still present
Mm.
in the fiction because of this other player's specific action. And I'm talking about usually more than just healing hit points. I'm talking about some like significant action. So, and the
Sure.
players tend to remember that and play off it, and it's a piece of of their whole reason for being there from now on. So yeah, I mean, it's certainly not a trivial act. That's
Yeah.
definite.
So that's been kind of going on with my own play, where I'm running things lately. But which is part of the reason why it was so neat to have Binri in
Right.
the Rune Quest game that you ran, where he was a small town guy out on the town kind of thing, out with the wild and crazy caravan people who
Yeah.
really knew how to throw a party, and managed to find a girl that really seemed to want to hang out with him and use this weird psychoactive substance, and boy did he like that idea. And
We do call
it
this
was
fantasy role playing for a reason sometimes.
yes, exactly. And it just, it was like, oh yeah, okay, that can happen. Well, yeah, I
Yeah.
mean,
The
that
yeah.
that can happen.
The I don't know, Rod, I don't know if you're familiar with the Rune Quest game I've been running.
I watched one of the videos.
Oh, you did?
I haven't
Okay.
I haven't watched all of those videos.
Who the hell can watch all the videos?
I mean,
I'm amazed.
Who the hell can make
I
all the
spent my
videos,
life
but,
editing these things, and then I'm like, who the hell is going to watch all of this? So I get you, but but even one, I mean, I appreciate that. But as you can
Yeah.
see, the kind of there's an odd thing, and I gotta say, I'm going to give RuneQuest a lot of the credit for it, not just us. But there is a naturalistic quality to that game that is exceptionally strong. And the notion that characters are really being played out of given sort of just a basic one or two dimensional background in my mind. Just with that alone, playing them on the basis of just what people would do. Just like you said, Gordon, looking at the situation, what is it that people would do is really, really easy in that game. And so the the idea of the characters all being sort of coming of age types. Furthermore, the fact that one of the other characters, played by Ian Cooper, Jonathan, was actually really, really played badly by a non-player character, a young woman who was basically teasing him on and manipulating him. And that particular sequence was so painfully felt by everybody at the table
Yep.
that I mean, just you could see everybody just kind of curl their toes and like try to draw away from the there. Everyone was just cringing at that, and um, Ian played his character as falling into that psychological trap so hard. The kind of thing that none of us ever, ever, ever succumb to once having done so once. You know, that the very idea of living through it again through a player character was just agony for everybody. And so it was this like, and so I'm saying that the whole party scene with Benry was, by contrast, a pretty serious relief, a pretty serious
Oh yeah.
contrast that kind of got us all back on track to, okay, the world is not all wretched and evil for teens.
Oh yeah, the juxtaposition was definitely part of the
Yeah, yeah.
how it worked. I mean, it just worked that way because of all those elements coming together. And there's definitely a trick to knowing exactly how to make it clear what's going on in terms of, there's sexy stuff happening, and then, but you don't have to describe it all. You don't have to get into too much depth.
We actually left that entire scene heavily veiled. I mean,
Yeah,
we
yeah.
actually even left out the verbs, right? We didn't say, well, this or that happened, but but still, it was, there wasn't much question, I think, in anyone's mind particularly, but that's not really the point. It was more, it was so much more social and sort of developmental for the character than it was about it's not like when you're watching a movie. We're all of the age, I think, that when they started to get a little more explicit in 80s movies, and considering our ages in the early 80s, do you remember how, like, in every R-rated movie, it was really a question of just how much was going to get shown this time, and so It
Well, I'm Dutch. We had all the things
oh
showing.
well, you see, yeah, that's
Age and geography are both important here.
yes, that's true. I bring this up because that was an element that was actually fairly absent from that scene in play.
Sure.
There was actually no, I would say
Mm.
zero interest in the erotic nature of play or of
Yeah.
events, and that's actually kind of cool. It was very much for older guys looking back, you know, at life at that point.
Mm.
Yeah, and just barely enough to know that you're signaling what's going on, and that's
Right.
all you need. I
Yeah.
mean, that's good enough. And actually, even the same thing with Jonathan, where um, it didn't take that much to make us all cringe that way because we knew
Right.
what was going on here.
Yeah,
We could see.
I even had the sequence where he was supposed to meet the girl in the woods. I even had the sequence involved where he, and it had to do with the particular roles. I mean, we're blessed with scan and listen roles
Yeah,
in the what he did and didn't make played into what I described. So it actually was sort of interesting that all he got was hints that made it absolutely obvious to us. I mean, that only an incredibly naive or self-deluded person could miss that she had just had this assignation, with her boyfriend in,
right.
and so you're right. I mean, it wasn't like I had to describe some sort of terrifying, Lacanian mirror moment for the character that everybody all had to look in now. Um, God help us all.
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah. But so in the Pathfinder game though, you're basically this sort of thing is just out of there, not happening.
Yeah, so I mean, and that's really the interesting question about all this, right? It's that to what extent can what I mean,
I'm gonna fix myself.
people meet and are attracted or not attracted, and things either happen or don't happen, and to what degree can you ignore that in a gaming environment without it interfering with people's ability to enjoy what's going on and feel like they're interacting in a way that works for the game?
Right.
Um,
Well, that's the question that's interesting is we say for the game, and that means more than just for whatever fiction is occurring, because
yeah, oh, definitely, it's got
there's
to work for the people themselves.
and also what the fiction is for is where I'm headed. I mean, for example, in the Traveler is a good example,
Mm.
and I've got a couple of examples here that I'm going to go into, where it really would be pretty odd for just to right in the game that I played. It was just one session of a game called Syntheside, which I actually considered to be the strongest homage to Firefly that I've run across. It managed to capture some of the things that I found compelling about the show, but one thing that was minimized in the rules, and we just played the one session, um, and we had pre-generated characters. There was a lot of emotional tension. I was playing the captain character. I was playing the captain character. This is available on the site, but who was kind of a bitter and fairly manipulative person who had sort of an almost disturbing maternalism toward this young woman, and had been sort of in control of that person's life for a decade. And looking at the characters on paper, you kind of really wanted the younger character to rebel and get this older woman's claws off her. And she had this boyfriend who was this sort of cybered out, mysterious guy, who turns out to have been like trained by the scary priesthood, the robot priests.
Mm.
Um, and so there was a lot of room there for uh, finding out more about the romance between the two younger characters. And anything they did in that regard, or whatever that romance was like, would necessarily put a bite on my character. We ended up, although nobody had sex with anybody in the game itself, if you look at that session, and I really give credit to the other two players who totally picked up on how I was handling it and vice versa, is that every decision started being made in terms of that triangle of interaction, to the point where I came within this close of sacrificing, the important, it's the important character, the one we were supposed to be caring about. I came very close to sacrificing him, very close to giving up the boyfriend to the interrogating robot priests. I mean, like, really close. It was touch and go for a second there about whether I was going to save our bacon by turning him over. And very little of this had been instituted by the GM as problems for us. These were all things we were actually injecting into play. And I wonder if more explicit romance between those two characters would have made that situation actually, would have made it more intense, first of all, and also, who knows, it might have pushed me as a player to have done it. By the way, all right, you got me. I trust you guys now. We're actually here to turn him over to you. I was actually considering doing that anyway. I mean, I was rehearsing that in my head as they were interrogating me, and I was failing rolls left and right. And I was like, no, if they start coming down on me, I've got a bargaining chip here. And but given that, if there had been more physicality going on between those two characters as played by the other two players, looking at it now in retrospect, I can't say for sure, but the possibility that my character would have reacted more strongly, even if I as the player was the only one who knew and my character didn't even know about that. I'm really speculating now about how play could have gone, but let's presume that the other two players had done some more romantic activity between those two characters, with me, of course, as a player present in play, knowing that the punch of the betrayal would mean something at that shared level, even though I wasn't really having the character react to that. The character would have been reacting to that existing. And it existed less in play. It existed less for us because it hadn't happened in play. So this is very much a topic where player knowledge is everything. Because, you can say these two characters are married, you can say these two characters are a couple, but if that's not acted upon in some significant way during play, then it matters less to everybody. And if it is acted upon, then it matters more to everybody, even if their characters weren't aware of or involved in or knew about that. So anyway, that's kind of where I was going with that overly extended example. I will also point out that in the recent Sorcerer game, there was no such activity, but but the entire story hinged upon an affair in the backstory, and the woman returning to the situation as one character's kicker, and an enormous amount of play hinged on the affair in the past and its implications to everybody else involved in the present. And so in many ways that game was absolutely charged with sexual tension, but not of the the sort of action that phrase usually implies. So that's another interesting example of present but not present. And then and I'm beginning to think that actually, the more I'm thinking about it, the more I'm thinking I like that. Just like what you described, Rod, about the Masks game, and what I just described about this Sorcerer game, I actually kind of like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, how much of that is just like in the case of the Mask game, like the character I was playing, like is the sort of double life character where
Right,
it's
yeah,
built
Gavin.
into your character sheet
Yeah.
that you have these other responsibilities, and so
I
I was sort of
must
thinking,
not tell. Yeah.
right,
yeah.
right.
Mm.
But I was sort of thinking how much of it is like if you build that thing into the situation from the start, does that help as opposed to just the typical role-playing way of doing things where the characters are sort of there in the middle and other characters sort of sail onto your horizon as threats or opportunities?
It's a good
And
question. Looks like we lost Gordon somehow for a second there. It's a good question. I am myself really on the fence about whether you supercharge things from the start or
right,
whether you see
Very.
things emerge. And when I say on the fence, it means I know it works both ways.
both ways.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I mean, I know that both work. So the question is just how do you keep whatever you supercharge play with from the beginning? How do you keep it from preventing emergent stuff?
Right,
And how do you prevent, well, this is kind of a double negative, but if you're relying on emergent stuff, then how much are you cheating yourself of things to work with,
right,
for
right.
more emergence, right? So,
Right.
I mean, there's no good answer to that, but every game has an immense amount of, I mean, it has its own profile. Every game design or every way a group decides to treat a game has its own profile. Good example from, 2004, so 13 or 14 years ago. um the uh the Dungeons and Dragons 3.0 that I was playing from so long ago, which included the other two characters. The two players were a guy my age or a little younger and his 10-year-old son. And I had them play two-player characters each, which actually ended up being okay for us in that game. And the father chose something really interesting. He chose to have a half orc and a half elf who shared the same human mother. So they were half brothers and were friends and adventured together. Um, and they were very, very different builds too. So they were extremely different characters. But of course, all the fun you can imagine cropped up as, when they casually referred to each other as brothers and other characters didn't expect it. And that they had no issue, right? That their mom obviously was some kind of interesting person, right? Having had two sons, both of whom seemed to be relatively functional, um, you know, by an elf and an orc. And the and so the the fun that we had in dialogue. I mean, the nice thing, of course, we had a 10-year-old boy at the table, and we didn't, feel any need. I mean, to have. I mean, there was a lot of family tension in that story, that we were in the plot that we did, and we. I don't know, so I would say that he really tuned into it sort of an emotional family level, but it was really pretty interesting to have that set up by a player, and nothing I did had anything to do with that. All of that was his idea. And yet I was struck by just how vivid it made that contribution. I mean, those characters suddenly became extremely interesting and very fun for him to play because he had all the ambition, he had all of the motive in the world to make them two very different people. And the thought that, we when I was looking at him, I was like, how on earth has I never ever seen that, or seen it even written or alluded to in any D&D material in my life? When, after a second glance, you're like, that's the most obvious thing in the world, right? To do with the basics of the race options in that game. You're like, well, obviously, that's cool. Where's the Forgotten Realms novel? With those two, with where who who could not have, not that I thought of it. But you find yourself asking, well, obviously, why didn't they think of that? Um, so that's another good example, and it's not just motherhood we're talking about, not maternity we're talking about. We're talking about some woman having sex with these, two other species. So,
Right.
so all of a sudden, it's interesting. Did I just say that? So the so that's another interesting example. There's you guys really got me thinking about the off screen or backgroundy versions, of
Right.
this, because the more examples I think of just from the last year, the more compelling they become. All my playtesting for my Vigil game, the Vigilante Superheroes game that I'm working on, a lot of the playtesting of that involved Steve Long, and Steve had a character. Now Steve is really kind of famous. He's the author of Dark Champions. He's sort of famous for playing like brutal superheroes, pistol packing supers, street guys, is uh and so he found himself actually playing the lighter and softer member of the duo of player characters, which isn't very useful. It isn't very common for him to actually find himself saying, society isn't always wrong, stuff like that. The law does have its place, and Steve's like, did I just say that? you know. And so, but the point is that his was the character who got a girlfriend during play, and as play proceeded, we had more and more scenes where it was pretty clear that they were having an adult relationship and spoke in the fashion of two people who were doing this. Just naturalistically, as two grown guys playing, we played the characters with, in a fashion that they couldn't possibly have any other relationship. And it was and again, it was completely, we didn't even have to we didn't even have to establish it. I didn't have to say, okay, you guys are sleeping together now, right? We didn't have to do that. But that kind of backgroundy effect to it, the naturalization of sexual activity among role-playing characters, acknowledged among members of the group through, word or deed. I'm not saying it didn't happen before Sex and Sorcery. I am saying that I didn't see it in a whole lot of texts in role playing.
Right.
As something.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh yeah. I think that's, well, I don't know. Have to think about going back through things, but certainly it would be very easy to find an earlier text. I was just thinking the one thing we haven't talked about yet is when it's horribly, horribly wrong when sex gets included in the game.
Right. Now, of course, I played.
It would not
Champions,
be hard to find examples of that going back earlier in text where a situation is posited that is just,
flatly don't go here.
They're communicating about it, and I don't want to have anything to do with it.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting because in my Champions experiences from the 80s, we were all in college and we were all X-Men freaks, and so we were all about the soap opera and the sort of Chris Claremont, John Byrne inspired, they're doing it and we all know it, and so and so that was kind of an ongoing thing. So I was kind of used to it from there. But we also knew that we'd gone off script as far as role playing was concerned to do it. Rod, were you about to say something I missed?
What was that? Well, I'm a little behind the conversation, I guess. I was just thinking in relation to the text. I thought it might be interesting to go back and look at that White Wolf stuff and see if any of the sexiness in those books was it all just sort of vampy and
there's so many
chrome, or was
there's also many now that it's really kind of hard to get at. I'm going to like piss off all people who are educated on White Wolf stuff in what I'm about to say, because I'm cherry picking one feature that may not be that important. The very first edition of Vampire, the one that I got actually as a birthday present, was very clear. Vampires are non-functional. Their genitals are all shriveled.
Oh, I remember that.
Yeah, and they were all
Yeah.
shriveled up and completely that was gone, out of play,
Right.
just
I
gone.
remember
And I suspect that the LARP scene's role in White Wolf's success, they house ruled that into a completely different form, within 5, 4, 3,
Right.
Well,
Well, there was a
and I'm
there was
pretty
a
sure,
TV show,
yeah, the
and
Kindred,
yes,
right?
yes.
God, I can't believe I remember
You're right.
that.
You're right.
Okay, but anyway, so
That
go
was
on
my
about
college years.
yeah. So go on. Well, what about Kindred? Or
No, but I mean that was a specific. I remember reading an interview with Mark Reinhagen or whatever, where he was talking about pitching the show to the TV executives, and he was like, "And vampires don't have sex," and they were like,
"Oh,
"Wait, what? Are you kidding?"
Yeah, exactly. You
No
do
sex, no
understand
TV
why
show.
everybody's reading these books, right?
Mm.
So
Yeah.
so as I recall, it was as quick as the second edition or the next edition. I don't know if they called it revised or second or what.
Right. Yeah.
Super glue, man. Spirit gum.
You need some cans.
Yeah. I do need that's actually probably my next purchase. As you can see, I am the low renter in this crew as far as this is concerned. But anyway, but you're right. Yeah, the next version, whether it was called revised or second edition, again, was, I believe, fixed, no pun intended,
Right.
fixed that, and I think it's pretty clear that now just how dismissive I want to be, because they did go on. I mean, they had their Black Dog line, which included Whole, which was which was explicit, but it was all parody. So
right.
then there was also their later stuff that was often rated with, for mature audiences only, and a lot of that had kind of what I would think of as fairly, I don't even want to be characterizing it. It just, I found it to be sort of uncompellingly graphic. But that's a matter of taste, and B, I'm not widely read across all of the titles in question.
Yeah.
But you see, to go to some of related titles of the kind, let's go back a couple of years for the game that Mark Reinhagen was the co-creator for, was Ars Magica. And that's a game that's extremely naturalistic. I mean, you spend time camping, right? You have characters with social classes. You have a lot of naturalistic role-playing of people like getting the job done that day, and especially when you play the grogs. And it just seems to me like a little bit like a Rune Quest game that would sort of fall naturally into play as just ordinary people being played very much as ordinary people, not just fighting the monster of the week and not just solving the mystery of the week. But maybe people speak highly of that game and their experiences in it. So
I'm not really that familiar with Ars Magica, but I've read people talking about it. It does seem like, a lot of people would build families.
Right.
It lent itself to creating you can build a community and literally families, and obviously there's sex going on there. And so it made sense within the context that presented. Whereas, at least some phase of, I think of it as a later phase, because I think of the earlier phase of D&D to be more. More. We had girls at the table, so you didn't have the tavern wenches and
I guess I kind of missed that.
The rest of it, that was all. That was what was in the module. That's what if you wanted to interact with women, that's the option you had, was to go find a wench somewhere.
Right. Like you, a lot of my early role playing with D&D and otherwise included women. So, and I'm not necessarily saying that means that everybody was decorous. But it didn't have this whole kind of weird cartoony. It wasn't that weird kind of that weird thing going on. But and I'm free associating slightly. Before and I know what I know where my free associating took me. Before I do, does anyone want to follow up on what thoughts so far, Herman?
Yeah, well, I'm thinking there's two things in when I started D&D at first, that it was all guys, so that was a bit of the weird kind of things, until there were a couple women who joined the group, and it all went more natural, and etc. And I can agree. One of the groups I run for is I game master stuff for a married couple plus their by now 16-year-old daughter. So that also, well, it sort of limits what you can bring to the table and what you aim for. But naturalistic relations and stuff, that's fine. But you draw the curtains pretty soon, is in my experience.
Right, and also you're probably not going to have a whole lot of like sexual tensions among characters, NPCs, and stuff like that as part of part of the drama.
Yeah.
The thing that had free associated off of me, because now I was thinking early 90s, and I'm thinking about games, and so I was thinking about Vampire and where it was going. To the point where by the mid 90s, White Wolf was pretty much billing itself as the R-rated role-playing company. But if we then split Ars Magica and go off with Jonathan Tweet, you go to Everway, which is squeaky freaking clean. It is scrubbed. There is no sex in Everway. It's which is weird because it's kind of begging for it in a lot of ways. And a lot of the imagery is very primal and very tribal and multicultural, and you sort of get the idea though that everything somehow got that somebody, it's like somebody took a scissors and just cut that out of there. It's and you're looking at play, and I don't know how I can describe why, but I just can't imagine unless you really went your own way with Everway. But if you were inspired by the text, I can just see that your games would be Ken and Barbie. I don't care how many. I don't care if this guy's the Pacific Islander inspired character, and this guy's this other character's the druidic, even the druidic blood and sex sacrifice priestess type character. No, once play starts, it just I can just see it washing straight out. I've played Everway, and certainly the more primal stuff that we brought to that, I knew I was just dragging straight in out of my more earthy fantasy role playing. And then that also brings me to Pendragon. So as you can see, I'm really sitting in the early 90s right now, right? Sitting there in Pendragon, and Pendragon is all about lineages and marriages and sons, and especially if you do the thing where you play for decades and decades of in character time, people age out of the game and the heir takes over as the player character. And and then of course it's Mallory, so everybody, practically every scenario you've got some kind of untoward relationship with the lady of the castle and whoever, and you develop passions, and passions often involve lust. In fact, I even think there's one of the character dichotomies is chastity versus I don't remember, lust perhaps.
Lust.
Yeah.
And
right.
so and so clearly, I mean, the game has it baked in that your character could swing toward lust or struggle with chastity or fidelity and stuff like that. I mean, it's there to be done, and there's at least one of the supplements is all based on romantic stuff. Although I will point out that in those, it's very much more about ideals and less about what are you going to do regarding this particular character. So I'd be curious to see where people took it in play. Did they turn it into more of the abstracted, thing where you betray your chat, you succumb to your lust because you give a flirtatious glance?
I don't think we ever went.
Never gave that a try.
Yeah, well, I've always wanted to see, to say, all right, I'm going to devote this significant portion of my life to playing real Pendragon.
Right.
The two guys I
Playing
know,
the Arthurian campaign.
well,
Yeah,
Jake
did
Norwood, Luke Crane, Tor Olivsrud, and I think a few other people did it. They said, all right, but it was a commitment. They said, all right, we're in it for the long run here. Everybody block off, sacrifice some portion of your parenting or spousal obligations, for the next X amount of time, and because Pendragon is here. And and they did it. I mean, they went through, dynastic
Yep.
family history of the game, through the saga of Arthur. And so I'd actually kind of interested in where they went as far as the sexual content is concerned. Few of the people I know playing were shy about that. I mean, Jake and I had one of the scariest two players games in that regard that I think I've ever had with somebody of either gender. And so yeah, I know none of those guys are really shy about that kind of thing. The question is whether it worked for the game. That's the interesting question. One last one from that same period, Legend of the Five Rings, where I know that it was an editorial mandate that they would write everything in that game as if people grew in the ground like vegetables. They'd have
Wow.
sons and daughters.
Hey.
They would have sons and daughters. They would have families and all the rest of it. But as best as you could tell from anything they ever said, the parents just watered a pot until the kid came out, and there would be no sex or contact of any kind, reference to it of any kind. That was actually an editorial mandate for the line, which is weird, frankly.
Yeah.
Especially considering the source
I
material.
know. Considering the source material is just rife with, and so I was a little shocked, and I played a pretty dedicated game of Legend of the Five Rings. I was not the game master, and my character was married and had a kid and took it very, very seriously. And I don't know. I mean, I will say that to the extent that we were influenced by that, it made play quite bloodless. Yeah, just as you imply, Rod, something was missing.
Yeah.
Um, the so yeah, those are some of the only other example that I was going to pop up from my recent experience. Well, there's two. One is another absence. I'm playing in a Monster Hearts game now. We've had 2 sessions. Editing those is a beast, which is why they haven't come up yet. But as you know, there are sex moves in Monster Hearts as an Apocalypse game that plays. It's designed pretty close to Apocalypse World, and the sex moves are very well thought out for the different monsters. Particularly like that the vampire. If you have sex with another character, you lose all the strings you have on that character. But if you refuse sex from another character, then you get a string on them. So the vampire is basically running around, turning everybody on and like leaving them high and dry. So at least as far as maximal string taking is concerned. But anyway, so they're very well constructed. And it's kind of interesting that we are playing in a very privileged private high school setting. 3 of the least raunchy builds. It's all tension and no win. There's a ghost, a vampire, and a ghoul. And if you know Monster Hearts, you know that those are 3 characters who, I mean, the one who comes closest to meaningful sexual contact is the vampire, and that mainly through gaming other people with it. The ghoul is my character, and is very the sex move is one of the dysfunctional ones. It's when this happens, nothing really good comes out of it in terms of relationships. And I can't remember what the ghosts is, but the point is that for a game of Monster Hearts, all played with teen characters, we've been significantly unsexy in 2 fairly eventful sessions. And that is, and I mean unsexy in the sense that nobody's really been pursuing it. The ghoul has a hunger, and you have a choice of what the hunger is for. Sex is one of the things that the ghoul could be constantly hungering for. And I decided that I really didn't want to play, a 16-year-old teen slut, and wanted to I really wanted to go with sort of more of the primal, disturbing, ghoulish things. In the second edition, you can't have the ghoul hunger for flesh because that kind of went too far too fast. So if she succumbs to her darkest self, then she becomes hungry for flesh too, is the way it works. So I picked, of the other choices, I picked thrills. So the character is basically thrills.
Okay.
Right.
thrills.
So the character just does all these heinously dangerous things all the time and lures other people into doing them, and is weird in a variety of other ways too. But the point being that I have a character for whom sex is part of the life that she's lost, because the sex move is this completely relationship dysfunctional thing, and she's hungry for thrills, and she's a ghoul. She's not exactly multidimensional when it comes to these things. So so it's kind of, I'm looking at it, I'm like, wow, that's interesting. We have basically an unsexy game of Monster Hearts. Interesting. Maybe that'll change through the course of sessions, but so far that's the case. And then we have, let's see. Oh yeah, I've recently returned to playing the game I was involved in for years, but have been 2 years off, which is the Empire of the Petal Throne. And my character in there actually is a female character. In previous play, did actually have sex with our much beloved NPC after he pulled off a battle. I mean, he participated in a battlefield victory. Um, I won't bore you too much. The point is that this was a moment where all of the people at the table were very, very pleased and proud and excited about what had happened in an exceptionally dangerous situation. My character, who had not been played as a sexually active character, in fact, very devoted to this undead god, and very oriented, sacrificing other people, yes. Preserving the body parts of henchmen who had fallen in battle so that they could be properly honored when we returned, yes. So basically walking around with, you know,
Pickled
satchels
parts.
of skulls. I mean, it was clearly not a well person by any ordinary standards. But really, as far as I was concerned, she, was an adult woman, but that really wasn't where she was at. So her choice to do this with one of the main characters was not just me throwing some sex into play because I'm playing a girl. It was actually pretty. It was actually pretty. It was the right thing to do for that character, who I tend to play very viscerally and spontaneously anyway. So then finally, Gordon, there's Runt.
Right. Which, since we don't have James here, I'm not sure we can fully diagnose everything that was going on with him.
I have been watching those videos.
Yeah. So
when he said she didn't have a good time.
That's right. No, it was really the strangest. Like, James, you are really working this in your head. How about some shared imagined space here? Because we are not sure what the hell you are up to with this. And I thought it was very interesting, though, because he was, and I'm going to speak for James a little bit, he was starting to turn his character Runt into a fairly negative character with a very self-serving agenda and a very ruthless attitude toward everybody that he met, including his companions, and was really kind of angling toward being a pretty bad guy. And I was okay with that. He even alluded in one of his comments in one of those posts that, Runt is not unaligned, and the alignment system in 4E is very, very coherent in a way that you don't find in other, the 2x2 matrix or the 3x3 matrix of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons isn't there in 4E. It's something else entirely. And there's only one alignment he could be talking about, and it was disturbing. And so, so with that in mind, I was like, okay, if that's where he's going with the character, I really want to be hands off as far as that sort of thing is concerned, especially in this game. And then he turned around in the last episode, and he was really remorseful. Runt really felt bad. Runt was chastened, His manliness had been shown, not wanting in kind of a wounded machismo way, so much as him going, wow, I'm really not all that, am I? And it was kind of an interesting thing. I mean, it's not like he made a roll and the roll went badly. It's not like he got feedback from me as to what I thought the NPC felt and then, springboarded off of that. No, in many ways, this was kind of James taking it through a wheel by himself that I'm not sure he had planned. I'll have to ask him about that. But it was definitely odd. You had a first of all, I don't know what it is about 4E that lends itself to this, at least the way I play it. But it's not the first time that a player character had sex with an extremely odd NPC. And and I also would say that game as written is abominably neutered, just like 3.0, which, like Legends of the Five Rings, I mean, that's just sprayed off. It's like sandblasted out of the fiction completely. And it's the same in 4E. I mean, all the characters are Kens and Barbies. The way to play is that way. There's nothing in any of the scenarios, nothing in any of the examples, nothing that involves that kind of interaction. And yet, which is also interesting, because when roles that are made that are relevant for that, you're stuck with diplomacy, bluff, intimidate. And insight. That's the interesting thing. You do have insight as a possibility. But it really means that if you're going to be interacting with somebody along those lines where roles are involved, your character's ethics are jumping to the forefront really, really strongly. So I thought that was, kind of an interesting.
Interesting thinking about that game. Of course, Eneku is made of crystal. Not clear that he actually has sex.
I'll be honest. That's the big thing I was wondering.
What
actually happened?
Does he actually do that?
Why am I reminded of Banky and Mallrats, buttonholing Stan Lee about just how every member of the Fantastic Four has sex? All right, go. Yeah, well,
but kind of as a consequence for that, what do I have as more of a thing to figure out about him? How was he created?
Well, you seem to be on about that, so I guess I might as well start caring as the DM after all.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's what he came up with, right?
Right. Well, here's the interesting thing to me is that I find especially for the skin, the reduction, that's the word I want, the reduction of 4E that I'm running in this case. Especially for that, I'm finding it very easy to treat the weirdness of the characters as windows into ordinary humanity. And especially in terms of the shard mines and thinking of underground comics and stuff, well, how hard is it to say that the shard mines, due to the astonishingly core cosmic principles by which they are, made, and their intense telepathy and psionic, they are psionic beings. Well, doesn't that just mean that two of them could have the most insanely good sex imaginable?
Sure.
I mean, and the crystals become, I don't know, interface the crystals however you want. But the point being that that the artist would have one hell of a good time with it. And so so that's kind of where, I mean, if you're interested, that's kind of where I go, because that's the kind of fiction we're making. We're making barbaric psychedelic fiction here, and the idea that any of the characters would be neuter physically, psychically, etc., that's flat out. That's just not happening, because
Yeah.
this game is made for everyone to be wondering, well, how do they do it? And so
Yeah, and I think the situation with Ineku, for how I think about it, sort of comes from, we haven't really met any shard mines for him
right,
to
right,
go anywhere with.
right.
And so, but in some ways, it's interesting. What I'm thinking right now. Had this thought 4 minutes ago, is that it's that absence of having some kind of sex component going on with him that makes this obsession with how was I created.
You've had to focus on something. Yeah,
I had to focus on something, and so it created something for me to look at, and it may not be good, but it did leave a need to be filled.
Right.
In its own way.
Yeah, true enough. I'm sorry, Rod, were you going to say something, or?
Oh no, just that presumably being obsessed with how you were created is a sexual issue, right?
Well,
exactly.
You guys say
but
yes
in a different way.
Yeah, the biologist says, well, the two don't have to be coupled. You understand this, correct? But so and I'm not even talking about copulation, which happens not to yield offspring in mammals. I'm talking about species for which they literally are two very different acts. Reproduction is not sexual, and sex is not reproductive. But okay, but that's my other blog. So anyway, though,
I'll be looking for that post.
Okay, and so Herman, I was kind of interested to go back to your Traveler example, where basically the logistics of play don't have anything to do with that.
No, it's probably also the dynamic of the group, because it's all guys and plus one and all male characters, which also, in this case at least, seems to preclude any sexual thing going on.
Well, again, I can think of a few interesting counterexamples in terms of, at the very least, non-player characters, if nothing else.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm thinking, though, the reason I wanted to go back to that is because I'm thinking of play experiences of mine, and game texts that I know, where that really does seem to be the default. You're supposed to play that way. You're supposed to not, you're, to the extent where I've encountered people who, even the discussion of disagreement or emotional tension between player characters, in a moment of playing, which I found very compelling, and the two people playing found very compelling, that there was a brother and sister who strongly disagreed over something. And it wasn't just color. I mean, they were really disagreeing on how something should be handled. Afterward, the other player, who was very much a long-time DM of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons 2nd Edition, and had pretty much identified as that, he was appalled. He hated that. He said, I thought the whole game was tanking when those two characters started arguing. The whole game was I mean, I hated it. Was so relieved when we got past that scene and got back to what we were supposed to be doing.
Yeah, it's a recognizable thing from, not this game, but past games. Yeah.
And so I was a little kind of puzzled, because I mean, especially with the two players I was thinking of, the fact that it was sort of the luck of the draw that they had made a brother and a sister who happened to be on opposite sides of a particular issue. It's the luck of the draw that that's what was going on, as opposed to some extraordinarily, I don't know, taboo, explicit relationship that the two characters could have had. Knowing these two people, they easily could have come up with that. Also, for this setting, I don't know if you're familiar with the German game De Genesis, which is what we were playing, which is really, I mean, it's, you want to talk Euro values and depiction of stuff. I mean, it's very much an explicit game. And so I was just thinking of just, where the two players I'm thinking of could have gone. What would the third player have thought then? I mean, we could have like driven him, out the room, which of course would have been, I'm not joking, because that actually would have been kind of abusive toward him, right? To have content and play. It would have gone totally over the line. And I mean that in a bad way, not, in a way that would be funny. So, but it is interesting. And is there games that I've played where there wasn't any such content and I'm good with that? And the answer is most of the time. I mean, or I have. Granted, being me, play tends to either implicitly or explicitly, drift toward the more primal human interactions, but not always. I had never had any intention of my Petal Throne character becoming involved with anybody. And through months and months of play, didn't play her in that fashion. Naked, yes. Painted, yes. Drugged, yes. Dancing for the death god, yes. When she didn't wear pants. This is Tecumel too, right? I mean, she walks around topless, but then again, so do most of the women in most situations. And it was actually fairly significant in a particular, ritual that I said, okay, she's not wearing pants, and everyone's like, oh, she's naked,
Yeah.
It's so, that was, but that was, but so I would go that far, but I wouldn't, but that one particular act on her part was very exceptional. I mean, very, I'm kind of curious as to what the group thinks. One of the other characters was a necromantic. Well, we're all worshiping the chaos gods in this particular game. And one character that we talked about in the discussion with James he had a dead wife. And when I say he had a dead wife, right? And so
okay.
right. Well, what it means is that he kept the body around because he wanted to become juiced up in level and social standing so that he could legitimately resurrect her and marry her. So it was not a wife. She was his betrothed. And
dead fiance.
Okay. Yeah, and it took a long time, but he did get her resurrected. And I think I'm not sure if I have the terminology correct, but not raised. She's not a living woman. She's a walking corpse, but she's compos mentis. She's not just a zombie. So she's a walking dead woman who is herself. And they got married, and given how weirdly that Barry has played that guy all these years, pretty certain that conjugal bliss is involved. So, and the way we all kind of like react and give him a little shit for it, I think we all are in that zone of understanding. And also the fact that he's playing her as much as he plays him. So she's a player character now.
Oh.
And is treated with great respect. Is treated as, in fact, well, my character considers her basically a sacred achievement. And all of us take the socially, the social side of it. All the characters consider this to be, if not normal, but to be very acceptable for a sorcerer of this standing to do this. It's with the blessing of his temple and everything is considered admirable. He was, so it's the more I think about it, that's pretty fucked up. You know? So
Well,
my character's little
from,
escapade is actually not the high point of this in our Pedal Throne game. The more I think about it,
well,
so
in terms of role playing, succeeding at making resurrection a big thing, I label that quite an accomplishment.
right. Actually, it
It's
happened.
all
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
always way too casual or
Right,
not
right.
possible. I mean, there's no. That's one of those things that I can see, and I think I can say myself, I would have loved to have that in a game sometime that succeeded at making the resurrection
We
of
all
a
cared. Yeah,
PC
yeah.
something we cared about and really and felt appropriately epic and all the rest of it.
Well,
And
this
I
is an
haven't
interesting
really seen
case.
that
Yeah,
pulled off.
this is an interesting case to tell you about our characters again. Um, the body of betrothed, dearly beloved, as I believe we referred to her most of the time. The body was not always treated kindly. The thigh bones were used as a repository for certain sensitive documents because we carted this body around a lot, frankly, and so actually using the body in a kind of desecratory way to hide secret stuff and things that did occur, and nobody's told her about it since she came back. but the but again, what's weird is that while being sort of a source of some gruesome humor and an acknowledgement of just how bizarre this guy's character could be, and also acknowledging the somewhat bizarreness that our characters are kind of like in the bad side, or at least the scary side of the cultural spectrum there. um Regardless, since the character has been a walking, talking, and as it turned out, upgraded to to player character status,
Mhm.
like I said, it legitimized the relationship. So the fact that this character has necrosex, both the original character and the new character with each other, she's a woman of substance to us now. She is a character that we do not treat with, and I'm talking about the players. We do not treat the
Mhm.
character with with derision, or with she's not a beta or marginalized person in play. I mean, when I came back and played the first session with the guys again, I was actually pretty impressed. I was like, wow, this character is a considerable, is a figure of respect in this group, and I liked it. So it's an interesting question. You actually we de-objectified the character by having her be sexually active as the primary feature of. I'm gonna be a little perhaps one-sided and say that that's one of the primary features of the character coming into play, was her presence as this wife. As James joked, he was like, yeah, watching five guys sit around and like invent all the rituals for a wedding was, in retrospect, you were like, you did what? You didn't fight a dragon, you didn't kill you didn't get a magic item, you didn't. No, we planned a wedding. So it's, but yeah, I thought that it was, the more I think about it, that game has actually got a little more, for what looks like kind of a explore and find treasure kind of game. It's got some emotional and sexual weight to it. It's just we don't really. It just shows up in direct fashion fairly rarely. Um, yeah, that's yeah, certainly James just kind of lets it happen. There's at least a couple of other guys in the group who are. Uh, it's kind of like they don't all bring it into play so much as they're kind of attuned to those dynamics when they show up among characters and role play accordingly.
Yeah.
So that's the weird thing. I mean, the game. I mean, is anybody here very familiar with the texts of the Empire of the Petal Throne?
Just skim
Yeah.
that first the copy of that first one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Same here.
I did not know Professor M.A.R. Barker, but it seems clear to me from reading the writings that to him, sexuality is an ordinary part of human life, in a fashion that if you read a lot of work by Gygax, in the gaming materials
Right.
doesn't really seem to be there in that fashion. So at least in terms of the fantasy, that we're doing, and so it's and so I guess I don't know if we're picking up on that. I don't know if we're like, because the characters are very, kind of South Asian, hot environment, skimpy clothing a lot of the time, unless they're, killing someone in a ritual. I mean, I guess the way you do it in Tecumseh is that the rituals are either more clothes on or all the clothes off. Otherwise, you basically are half dressed. And so I guess I'm just saying that the game seems to carry with it a certain implied sensuality, in my opinion. There's a lot of sensual, tactile, what does it smell like, ecological emphasis, in there. There's a big emphasis on the ecology of every single place, and what the dirt feels like. I don't know if that kind of content contributes to bringing more basic human interactions into play or not. For me, it seems to.
Well, I think it can, and it's like it can go in another direction where it becomes more extreme, objectified, and not very connected to normal human behavior. But
Right.
I've seen some Tecumseh games that go more that way with it.
Interesting.
And not played in them.
Right.
But
I see.
but I can also definitely see it going the other way as well. And actually, it's a very, we're talking about text at the start. It's a very interesting example of a completely different kind of text about sex than
Right.
what you saw in D&D or in other places at the time.
Right. The early Rune Quest material was not ribald, but it was fairly intensive, especially if you just read. It's pretty clear that there's a goddess of love who runs prostitution temples across the land.
Right.
But anyway, so Herman, any thoughts that there's some interesting patterns that are cropping up anyway so far?
Yeah, I think that there's group disposition. How do you call it? Group formation, which I think influences things. Who's on at the table? Trust is one of the things. I guess. Do you trust the people around the table to take the story to a safe place and to keep interested, etc.?
What's interesting about it is that you go somewhere that may not be considered safe on paper, and then you find out that it's safe after all.
Right.
Which is it's one of the reasons why it's kind of like, I made a joke about it in a recent game that I play with a gray card rather than a black card. It's the same as the black card, except that you don't really agree on very much beforehand. You have to, in other words, if you really feel like you're crossing a line, make sure that it's the line you really feel rather than one you feel you think you should feel. Sort of. But I think that what I'm seeing, or from the conversation though, is I'm getting surprised by how little this has to do with in-play on-screen sex, which has happened in a number of games that I've written about. I wrote about them in Sex and Sorcery, and then in games I've played since then. I mean, that game that I played with Jake Norwood, it was a short-lived game at the time, was called Rune Quest Slayers. And at this point, I think it's called Rune Slayers or just Slayers. And I'm not sure if it's actually in print or available. But in that one, I mean, on-screen explicit, even, the sex was part of play. And then also that's occurred in games with me in games with women involved, sometimes to the surprise of the men at the table. not because they were the women, but because of what they were saying in the first place was enough to, give us all a jolt. Um, and then of course I've my own game, Slay With Me,
Hmm.
has a tendency to go that route. And so, so I guess I'm used to, I mean, I can talk about tons of times when explicit sex in the fiction was part of play. But what's interesting me the most in this conversation is when it isn't, when it's present but not done, and
Hmm.
when
Yeah.
it's veiled to the extent where we don't really know a lot.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the interesting things that I've kind of been drawn as we've been talking here is that in some ways it's really not about the characters themselves explicitly or even, you know, very implicit, so we don't even really know whether they did or did not have sex, but that there's that reality is there in the fiction somewhere. I mean,
Right. Right.
I'm thinking even into the Pathfinder with the guy's 13-year-old son that I'm in. I've had a lot of family issues
Right.
come
So it's
up
a
in
lot
that
like my
game.
old D&D game
I've
that I was talking
Yeah, I've
about.
had a
Yeah.
lot of husband and wife things happening, and
Mhm.
and so that it's not that maybe when it just becomes a problem to exclude it is when it tries to push it entirely out, and there's no room for that to show up at all.
Right.
But
Right.
you don't necessarily have to do anything more than
Hmm.
have it be a reality that, yeah, listen, there's families in the game. You
Well,
know what
that's
that
the
means.
well again though that leads me to the Rokugan situation with Legends of the Five Rings, and that's where I would like to know about what people did. Did they just
Right.
basically say, all right, you know what, we know what we're playing here and we're going to have a really good time doing it, and maybe even without considering it at all, it turned into a more naturalistic thing with, sexual events and, the outcomes of them and the emotional tensions around them, or maybe they don't happen, but the reality is there, as you say. In other words, they've took one look at the text, and whether they knew it or not,
Hmm.
waltzed away from it for purposes of enjoying their game more. I'd be really interested because that game was played a lot. A lot of people played Legends of the Five Rings. A lot of people invested heavily in it financially and in terms of time. For about a 5-year period, it was considered a preeminent role playing setting. Um, and I would like to know what people did with that, especially because it wasn't just happenstance, it was an editorial mandate that the texts abided by. So it's a very interesting case study of the text saying no. And what now I want to know what happened at the tables.
Right.
Right? There's a lack of neutrality there that makes it an interesting,
Hmm.
opportunity.
Yeah, makes me
Um,
wish I said I could play. I could say that I played it, but I didn't.
there's plenty of things to talk about as far as the game design is concerned. Um, Rod, looked like you were thinking over there. Thoughts?
I'm just trying to think how much of this maybe has to do with like feeding into this sort of thing you've been talking about D&D being its own genre, and how so much of what the content of these games people are playing is this sort of game fiction that's generated from games where
Right.
like you're just there's no
There's no
in
reference point
other words
except the game
right,
itself. Yeah.
right, in other words, is it the case that the more you get to where the game is definitely like in the superhero game, like
Yeah.
everyone, there's always at least one character with a girlfriend in a superhero game because
Yeah,
it's
superhero
in the
games are
it's in the comic book.
yeah, and it's not only that, but they're grossly physical. I mean, that's
Yeah,
the thing. I
yeah,
mean, the there is no way on this earth that you're going to be looking at superhero comics and not being aware that,
right, right.
you're looking at
They're
yeah, you're looking at their bodies,
hot people.
and
Yeah,
yeah, it's part of what's going on here. And
yeah,
the uh so yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot there to work with. It's may not be impossible, But DC tried for decades to scrub sex out of Wonder Woman and Superman, and they did not succeed. They every time they turned over, the fan base grew up and started making the comics, and every time that happened, they brought it right back in. So that's happened like 4 times, I think, in the history of Superman and Wonder Woman. And so I get that, but you're right. But that's, you've got, I'm running with what you said. You've got comics to work with. You're playing superheroes in role playing, and the comics are sitting there in your head as well.
Right.
In D&D fantasy, it's not.
Yeah.
The game is the fantasy, and the fantasy is the game. And and one wonders if another, games with a very, very defining hobby presence like Traveller, one wonders if that's not sort of baked in, that other concerns are just out. Those games are significantly
it's certainly
lacking in trenchant politics, right?
It's certainly not a part of the game text.
Yeah. And like their versions of religion are also in game in somewhat disconnected things, in my opinion.
Right.
Which is so I'm really thinking of some of the the more charged aspects of human socializing, of which sex is one. And money too doesn't really seem to be wealth. Right. Money is a game currency, a resource for sure. It's a game resource, but it doesn't seem to be much about character wealth. What's in textual Dungeons and Dragons, particularly advanced Dungeons and Dragons, what's the problem with not having much money as your characters, in terms of your character's life?
You can't buy a healing potion.
Right, but but that's what I mean. It's resource based, exactly. It's not. Oh, my character is like poor. I mean, are you in debt? It's a medieval society. Does that mean I'm in debt?
Yeah, that's fascinating, because that would be it's so easy to implement, because you're counting shekels, as you once said. Anyway,
yes.
You can just
and
people
also
buy privileges.
There is a lot of stuff in Advanced Dungeons and Dragons in the original text, much of which is written by Gygax. There's enormous sections on currency. There's enormous sections on social status. There's enormous sections on, the medieval, the sort of mid-medieval or high medieval, social structure, which is, in my opinion, somewhat messy text. You can never tell what he's getting at. And who was I just talking to? I was actually talking to an OSR luminary who said that he was reading that stuff as a kid and poring over it again and again and saying, what on earth am I to make of this?
Yeah.
How do I use this? I mean, there was no connection to play, and yet, strangely enough, your character being obsessed with making all this money is part of play. But what does wealth mean, right? And so that's not there. So and now it's no surprise that the games in question, that as I say, the OSR is primarily composed of very innovative and thoughtful game design, which isn't Dungeons and Dragons, sorry. And so therefore you start seeing games where the character's wealth actually takes on power as a piece of play. So but that's an example, right, of these things that, because they're defined strictly as the genre of the game as itself, and wealth and Traveller, I mean, I'm Traveller ignorant because I only know the first version, and I don't have play experience with it. So to me, Free Trader Beowulf worrying about his wallet is a big deal.
Yeah, until you get beyond the point and you got oh, we have bought the ship.
Now we've bought the ship. Now we're done, right?
Now we buy a bigger ship, or we go, we explore the galaxy finally.
Right.
Or things like that.
Well, or as my friends who were really into Traveller said, wait a minute, we've got enough money to buy a ship. We can retire now.
Right.
Yeah. When we first met
we can do it. We can live our happy life. We don't need to be doing all this adventuring stuff anymore. We can afford a ship.
Yeah. Yeah, what's
You
funny
just
is
sell it and live happily
but-
ever after.
Hold on, Gordon. Herman's on it.
yeah, when we first started play, we generated characters, and two of them got so immensely wealthy during character generation.
Oh,
It was
there's that too. Right.
Like, okay, let's roll new characters. 'Cause
That's right.
These
Yeah.
won't be
These
fun.
guys are going to be your boss. Right.
Yeah, something like
Right.
that. So we could reuse the characters as bosses or whatever. But we wanted to start play well, like nobody's really, and well, that was fun for a while. So now we're like, okay, now we got a lot of money, we got a big new ship. What are we going to do now? No, well, that's the sandbox we're let loose in. And during the while, our game master tries to push us into the bits of adventure he still has left. So it's
Yeah. It's
part of it is it's a puzzle game sometimes to see, okay, how can we make more money, more in-game money from what we're doing and stuff.
Well, if we talk about money instead of sex, I mean the story that I have heard, that I saw myself
Herman and I
happen
both just smirked.
and-
But go on.
and have heard multiple times about early D&D, the smartest move anybody can do in I think it's first edition D&D is everybody pooled your starting money together
yeah.
and buy a war dog.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Let your war dog kill everything for the first few levels,
Right.
and you'll get
right.
your experience points there, and then
Right.
you're done.
Well, so anyway, the idea for this seminar was mainly to take a look at what characters have gotten up to really like do the lab thing. What's the reality that we're looking at?
Yeah.
And what jumps out of it is actually pretty interesting. That past play, aside, looking at my play in the recent years since Sex and Sorcery, I actually see, although plenty of willingness to have explicit sex occur, I see the most productivity that I'm seeing from it is the presence of sex as a reality in play rather than its depiction in play being all that important.
Right.
Or rather, the depiction in play can be extremely mild or even unwanted, and we played accordingly, but the presence actually makes for a better game. Makes more.
Yeah, and going back to what Rod had said a little earlier, given the risk of the blandification that can exist in D&D, this is one of the antidotes to that. This is a way to try and get something that's not just itself regurgitated, is to bring in that reality. And for some people,
it will certainly do that. I mean, that's one thing that happens. In fact, even in a game like Sorcerer or Circle of Hands, or whatever, where sex isn't, quote, required as a presence like it is in Slay With Me. I mean, not that you're mandated to have sex and Slay With Me, but its presence is required as a piece of the landscape. Whereas in those other games, it's not, but it's really built in. Human tension is built in so strongly into those games that tends to come in all the time. But I really am finding. Well, I'm very curious. I'm very curious about how often sex moves are used in playing Apocalypse World and games of that ilk, which include the sex moves. Dungeon World, that actually has sex moves, doesn't it?
Wait, no.
No. I was going to say, what is that doing in there? What do they have any equivalent?
It should have sex moves. No,
I'm not skeptical. I'm curious.
I'm just trying to go back because that's what I'm actually playing right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm trying to think of anything related to that in the text, and I don't think there's much. Maybe oddly enough, in the monster section, some of the sexy monsters have sort of earthy language, but I don't think the game explicitly. Oh, I'll tell you what is actually replacing it is bonds, which are
bonds. Well, I thought bonds replaced history, but I guess I'm wrong. I don't.
Yeah. Oh well, history.
It's been so long. Yeah.
I mean, the sex moves are related to history in Apocalypse World.
In many cases, yeah. You mess with the HX values, just like you mess with strings in Monster Hearts. But yeah.
So I don't think there's much explicitly about sex there, but but I don't think it's scrubbed. You know what I mean? I don't think there's any sort of like, we've got to get this out of here.
Right.
If a group were to think of their bonds as having some
Or some
sexual
of them,
component, that might be think
Right,
of some
I
of their
mean-
bonds as having some sexual components. That could be perfectly
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
but
that's up to you.
Herman, what do
Yeah.
you think as another dungeon worlder?
Yeah, it's not something which is around in the game text at all. It's very much a D&D inspired game in that way.
Well, yes, although again, I'm the one who's always talking about the earliest
Yeah.
D&D and all the
That-
thighs and
text-wise.
succubi and whatnot, but
Yeah, that's
Um,
true. Most true. But there's nothing in the text which suggests
and both
sex
of
rules or
you,
things like that.
Rod, you hadn't been clear about it, but I'm presuming that in the games that you've been playing, that really that kind of content hasn't been cropping up.
Not much in the one I'm playing. In the one where I'm a player in, I threw in that my character was sleeping with an NPC patron, and the DM sort of thought that got tickled apparently and made a note, but there hasn't been any follow through on that.
Right.
In the one, I ran a one shot for some friends in my hometown, and I had prepped some sexy content, but it didn't get into the game mainly because I sort of what I would consider a strategic error in presenting the situation to the players. But I wanted it to be there. Yeah, it's just it's this sort of thing where I just fell into this habit of, presenting this like settlement of mysterious characters as sort of something that sailed in on the horizon, and so that gave the players the opportunity to decide that's a threat. We're going to keep it at arm's length.
I see.
So, in that sense, if I had made it more to where that group of characters was embedded in the situation when they came to the area they were coming to,
then
it would have had to have been addressed. So
interesting.
Live and learn.
Yeah. Whereas Herman, you're saying that your game is pretty much a relatively unsex version of Dungeon World.
Yes, mostly, almost mostly. But yeah, there were some. One of the characters is an elf, and they visited the hometown. So she went and visited her brother, and there was family there, etc., etc. So there was certainly the implication of there's normal family life around, but our barbarian halfling tends to, when trying to poke him to tell something about his homeland, because that's what you do with barbarians. You try to get the player to tell something about the character's homeland. Doesn't really go to pick up on the hints I try to drop. So
interesting. Yeah,
and I'm not going to push people to.
No, certainly not. I mean,
especially
especially if I'm not mistaken, in Dungeon World, a great deal of it is like throwing spaghetti and seeing what the players are going to run.
Yeah,
with
seeing what sticks.
I think so. Yeah.
Which is a good thing.
Yeah.
So the take home I'm getting is quite interesting at this point. I mean, we're not exactly a survey among us, but it's a lot of different games and a lot of years. And I know that I know that ever since the early 2000s, so let's say for the last 15 years, that the previously kind of almost mandated, and not 100%, but the almost mandated cleanliness of role-playing texts, ever since ever since the about 1980 all the way up through, and with some exceptions, but the general cleanliness of RPG text, well, that's kind of over. We've kind of had our 70s, of in film analogy, and now things have kind of blown open a bit.
Right.
Well, the question is, first of all, good, but second, what are we seeing in play? I'm just really interested. I'm really interested in what people do in games where where the content's absent, what do they put in? Where the content's present, especially when it's extremely present, do they make use of it? In my, if not long-lived, but relatively eventful, multi-session Lamentations of the Flame Princess game, none of the characters, none of them went for any kind of sexual activity or content, which is kind of interesting.
One strand I'd throw out there, if we're talking kind of overall over the years of role playing, that where sex stuff showed up a fair amount in play, was Mechton, Japanese anime driven gaming, and giant robots and things like that.
Well,
and
yeah,
there was always somebody who was sleeping with the other family, the opposing family. There was always some sort of soap opera intrigue going on with those.
Well, and it sounds like that's from knowing the genre, right?
Yeah. I mean, I agree. The games themselves, I really don't know how much they had in there about relationships and stuff. The Mechton game, which was the first anime Robo Suit anime game, which was by Mike Pondsmith, our Talsarian game. And if there's anybody on this earth who's science fiction genre savvy, it's Mike Pondsmith. I just posted the seminar from last week about science fiction role playing and science fiction television, and of course, anime was a big piece of it. And one thing we talked about,
I haven't listened to it yet.
Well, I just posted it today, and it's like freaking long, because there's actually 3 conversations in it sequentially. But one of the things that was pointed out was exactly that you don't even need to have much personal dramatic soap opera content in the text of the game itself, that anybody who picks up one of those games to play, especially because they had such a presence in television. I mean, that was one thing that sort of struck us. It was, wow, anime, once it was discovered in the States, it hit TV hard. I mean, kids, it wasn't fringe. A whole 2 generations, 3 generations of American kids grew up watching BattleTech and whatnot. And Transformers, the whole deal. And so they knew what to do. It was like us playing comics. It was like us playing superhero comics. We knew what to do. Yeah, we got rules for Power Blasts, but it's going to be about the illicit relationship with the supervillainess too. It's going to happen. And so yeah, we talked a lot about that. We really wanted to know in that talk how much long form play of those games turned into fairly compelling soap opera. We inquiring minds want to know.
Yeah, I had at least a couple that did, and the group, I actually, I'm a little old for having come into anime and seeing that on television, all the rest of it. Most of what I know I learned through gaming with these people who did it, and I heard tons of their stories about what they did with being more anime freaks and more true to it. That was definitely along the lines of that kind of soap opera. So I think it definitely did happen.
Yeah, as Angel and I said when we were talking about it, we were like, why else would you play? You're not playing for the freaking robots,
Well, no, you do have the engine.
Yeah.
You do have the Mechton technical system and the engineers who try and build the ultimate mech and all the rest of that.
Yeah,
and,
I know. We have the same thing in Champions where, okay, with this many points, what can I build? But yeah, the thing that so yes, I mean, it's clear that if you're looking at, it seems a little sad, and I hope I'm wrong, that if you're looking at an inspiring genre for your role playing, that the tendency to go into more relationship-y and, shall we say, sexual presence, if not direct activity, is strong. And I think that's probably fair to say that probably happens. I mean, we have 2 case studies right here already, and I'm sure there are more. But if you have role playing that's self-referential, you tend to see it not happen. Well, that's kind of depressing. I mean, as a medium of activity of our own, don't we have our own homegrown, long-form, human tension soap opera thing with sex in it? I mean,
And so I have a weird
I'm
story
not.
where
I am not pleased at that particular, evidential characterization of the activity. And I hope I'm wrong. I mean, hope somebody pops up and says, "Hey, we play our self-referential role-playing game. We don't have this other. It's its own genre, whatever." And this happens all the time.
I do remember there being a thing in college D&D where married couples would have their characters married in the game. I don't know if that was a big thing. And I ran this 5th edition D&D game a few years ago with almost all Air Forces who were like 10 to 15 to 20 years younger than me. And I found out during the game, I was just trying, it was like 7 or 8 people at a time. We were all drunk. I was just trying to keep the boat above water. But I found out later.
I want the actual play post at Adepts Play ASAP is what I want, because this sounds like a lot of fun to talk about. But go on.
I'll try to sort out the details. But I found out that there was this whole sub game of note passing going on that they weren't telling me about, where all of their characters were like the one half-orc barbarian was constantly trying to bang the paladin, and he was just having none of it because he had to pray to maintain his chastity. But there was definitely a lot of enthusiasm for that content in just a straight up D&D game, and most of the players.
Why am I reminded of Vincent Baker's game Poisoned?
Maybe so.
Which has a great deal of piratical activity.
None of this was coming from me at all. Most of the players were actually new to playing like tabletop role-playing games. They'd all played World of Warcraft, and so
which is interesting. I'm given to understand. And World of Warcraft has no avenues for such activity. Is that correct?
Not that I know of.
Yeah,
I mean,
unless people never know what happens in the chat.
Texting in the chat channel. Yeah.
Well, which is pretty much what was happening in your games. So who knows?
Right, exactly.
Maybe they learned that from World of Warcraft. Hooking up on the chat window.
They probably did. Yeah. I have some experience playing World of Warcraft, so.
Yeah, I don't either.
You put that very, very well, Herman. You expressed yourself very well in saying that. I see your point.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah,
cool.
I'm running. I'll put a link in the. I've been the. How do you call it?
Is this a chat archive?
The host master of the hoster of this role-playing World of Warcraft site for over 10 years now.
Oh wow!
So there's 10 years of pictures and stories and people talking in character amongst themselves about and inside World of Warcraft. Right?
You should post about that at Adepts Play too.
Yeah, I'll
that's a really interesting. I mean, especially because we can go and actually look at it. We can look at the records through the link.
Yes.
That's really, but it's also interesting. Everyone is always dissing World of Warcraft as being not real role playing, right?
Right.
I mean, and here you are telling us about this emergent, mutant strain, of
and it's been going on for since it started, I guess.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting thing where, and now you see people in World of Warcraft trying to use D&D like rules to run scenarios.
Right. Well, that's
it's
full circle going on there.
Full circle going on there.
Yeah, so I can see that easily.
Yeah.
The urge. I mean, just looking at some of the beautiful, war games around 1970, the fantasy stuff and the science fiction stuff, you're just dying to play the characters. I mean, you look at White Bear, Red Moon, and you can see why the second they started thinking more in D&D terms, they were like, we got it. We got it. We're playing these people. Well, we talk about for the purpose of the game. Does it fit with the game? And yet the data are showing from what we've talked about that we are not necessarily always talking about games with where it would look like a good fit. Or where it seems to fit in systemic or terms. It's not like we're not talking about experience points for developing relationships. We're not talking about, this many levels means you're this more attractive, or we're not talking about seduction roles. We're not talking about any of that stuff.
Mm.
We're talking very much more about a variety of human tensions being in play as the landscape of how characters interact. And for lack of a better word, a certain naturalistic sense of play in which the characters have time. It's not just
Mm-hmm.
tavern, armor shop,
Right.
healing
Yeah.
potion, and back to the dungeon. It's not
Yep.
just doing that. The characters have time. And this is very relevant to Tor Erickson, who's working on his hack of 5th edition right now, where he really wants relationships and town play to be different from dungeon play, but also consequential. And so this actually is some interesting data for him, for sure.
Yeah, it becomes a question of where do you draw the line between its importance as fictional background and as somewhat in some form gameable content. I mean,
I
clearly we
found
can see in Apocalypse World that there's a success at having sex moves. I mean, there is
correct.
a way to make
Mhm.
some of this stuff gameable. What would make sense in a setting like Tor's talking about? I watched the
Well,
first one of those. I haven't gotten caught up.
yeah, there's a couple of interesting points that he's made about that. But the one that the example that strikes me is that I wrote Circle of Hands by picking up my ancient manuscript of Grey Magic. I was rewriting Grey Magic and playtesting it, and then finding myself making basically a new game with the bones of the old. And one thing I
Okay.
thought about, I actually had sex rules as like a chapter heading, as a subchapter heading in my manuscript for the longest time. And after a while, I mean, after I'd been role playing, play testing and trying things and working out stuff, and I said, what on earth am I doing? I'm just doing that because Apocalypse World has sex moves. And I figure that with a gritty game of this kind, this brutal game of this kind, this, this
Mm.
earthy, I mean, you can't, I say with some modesty, and maybe you can, but it would take a lot of work to get more muddy and bloody than Circle of Hands. And so, there I was thinking, well, these characters are gonna have sex, and they're all deeply embedded in kin and all sorts of stuff like that, and they're they're the and then I found myself saying, no, I think that's gonna happen. I think that's gonna happen without. I think I've got the template of what's the word I want? I have all of the material here in place for that to be important in play, but just like it's not important to decide whether my character is an alcoholic or not in this game, or I should more likely hashish addict because there's that in the game. But you will discover through play and develop through play whether the character is an addict. You will
Right.
do the same thing with sex in this game. I am certain of it. It's just humanity is too strong in this game for that to not be present. But I
Right.
don't need sex moves. And the sex moves to me were very much an experimental part of Apocalypse World that I am not entirely certain fit the way that they might. I mean, I kind of almost want to say, what would happen if you play Apocalypse World without sex
Do,
moves? Would you actually see more sex rather than less?
right.
That's
Do
I
I
don't know.
remember?
I don't know.
Do I remember years ago reading some kind of blog post from Vincent talking about questioning himself about why he didn't have more sex in his game?
It sounds like something he would do because he's always reflecting on these things, and
Right.
I would be really interested to review that and see. The same thing goes for the same thing goes in looking. Well, no, the question then raises in regard to Monster Hearts, and actually, I think they actually fit better in Monster Hearts than they do in Apocalypse World, because Monster Hearts is a game about basically dysfunctional teens And
Right.
I'm not talking about the monstrosity, and I'm not talking about the strong, if not required, but strong role of queerness.
Right.
I'm talking not about that at all. I'm talking about dysfunctional as teens emotionally,
Right.
Right.
because unlike most of the apocalypse games, these or any role playing games, these guys are fairly limited in their emotional capacity to influence themselves and one
Yeah,
another.
they can pretty much only sort of manipulate or
Right.
provoke, right?
Only
That's
when you have the growing up moves that you
Yeah.
can't get to for a while.
Right.
Then you
That
have,
actually is
right.
carried over into masks, by the way. The
Yeah, I'm
growing up
not
moves.
surprised. Yeah. No, we in our apocalypse world discussion, which Herman and Gordon were both involved in.
Oh, Hermit.
That
Oh,
was
yeah. Okay.
her masks and Monster Hearts were both mentioned in that regard.
Right.
But in contrast, so therefore in Monster Hearts it's important because the kind of messed up sex that you get into before the growing up moves
Right.
is important, right?
Right.
So that makes sense. And so I'm reminded of, and the people are always going to misunderstand me when I reference this film, but if you watch Fast Times at Ridgemont High and you don't just treat it as a meme fest and think it's a comedy,
Right.
and actually watch the story, and particularly if you're of
Right.
a certain age, it's not fucking funny.
Yeah.
And the coming of age sex stuff in there, a lot of it is really heartbreaking, particularly with Jennifer Jason Leigh's character. And it's just not, it's not played for laughs even.
Right.
A great deal of that movie isn't. And that's what I think of, is that particular content when I'm thinking of Monster Hearts. So like I said, though, we're the ones, however, who are playing unsexy Monster Hearts so far. So go figure.
Yeah, there's something really interesting about where you make a move, where you actually make the rules, where you do something like Circle of Hands, where you just think it's going to happen because
Mm-hmm.
it's in the background. When is it useful to have, tracking history or relationship markers? When should the players just know what their relationship with the NPCs is? And if you don't have that anyway, then the markers aren't going to help. But maybe sometimes there's something about that would be interesting to know more about in relationship to sex in the game. But
in the science fiction,
it's not easy to me to think how to go through that.
In the science fiction seminar, I talked about a game called Albedo, which is, I think, the first game with relationship rules, and it's a science fiction game. And
that's the anthro.
It's based on the comic Albedo, it's an anthropomorphic. And the interesting thing about it is how nuanced they are. For the very first game with relationship rules, they're not casual. They're quite nuanced. And so I'm very interested in that. There is no good answer. When do you let the rules be soft but real? When do you make the rules pretty hard? This many points that gets transferred. You lose this many points. It affects your rolls for this. And then when do you say, no, I bet you that's gonna float right up to the surface, given everything else. And who has an especially good touch with that is Avery Alder, whose rules are generally really nice at not overdoing it. And yet what's there is like mechanics from hell. What is there is really there. So, but yeah, I really, it almost makes me want to design a game in which extremely explicit sex, love, relationship, fidelity rules are like, just like a Euro game. You're moving the tokens around and you're like checking it off and you're gathering sticks, and then you got to choose whether to lose your sticks or your tokens, and all that. And then make a game where I put in as much content that supercharges humanity, and then see whether sex pops in. In fact, one might say I already did that. one might say,
Right.
Trollbabe and Sorcerer are notoriously sexy in play. And there ain't nothing in the rules that says anything that you have to or must or whatever.
Yeah.
Oh, I was also I missed when I remember when I went on the Jonathan Tweet trajectory away from Mark Reinhagen from Ars Magica.
Oh,
I took him
yeah.
to Everway. I forgot to take him on to Over the Edge,
Oh, yeah.
which is a game in which sex is happily referenced,
Right.
you know, in the most,
Yeah.
in the most
What-
naturalistic, my age group way, I'm sorry, what about
What was
that?
the timeline? What was the timeline on that? Was that before? Was that like a year or 2 years?
Oh, geez, I really have to.
Everway?
I am.
From 92, I think.
Yeah, Everway was
92.
actually published just before it, but
Yeah, I
they were being played. I mean,
Really?
Over the Edge was played. Oh wait, isn't Everway 1994?
95.
Everway is 95. I remember that being a
Okay.
sort of a banner. I was in college
Yeah.
at the time.
So Over the Edge came out first, and it came out of play. I mean, they built that game through play entirely.
Right. And Everway sort of had, relatively speaking, big money.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah. Well, it
what
was
looked
also,
like big money at the time.
it was big money, and it also, more importantly, it was engineered in many ways. I mean,
Right.
they were aiming at doing mainstream role playing in a mainstream way, and
Yeah.
in many ways, I think they kind of made a mistake in realizing and forgetting
Yeah,
the thing
they
that
always.
White Wolf did learn, which was if you want to go mainstream, put mainstream stuff
More
in it.
sex. Yeah.
More sex, not less, right? And so pretty straightforward,
Yep.
right? But anyway, the thing I'm trying to get at is that Over the Edge is clearly a go get 'em in your face, happy go lucky. But you know what? Just like Sorcerer, or prefiguring Sorcerer, as it was one of the primary influences,
Mhm.
no rules for it. It's just in it.
Right.
Right? I mean, there's that minor, one of the quote lesser baddies, the initial characters you run into is I'll never forget her. Molly is the character's name. The woman who has the gang of baboons, and it's explicit.
Oh,
She's having sex with the baboons because she likes it. I mean, it's just how it is. And there's all kinds of other things. There's all kinds of other things in there that are
I'd go ahead and throw into that trajectory for Jonathan Tweet Talislanta, which I think is 92.
Well, actually, the original is from 87, 89.
Yeah,
but
the original,
his version,
the
is
Jonathan
92.
Tweet version,
right?
yeah,
third edition, yeah.
And that's about when I played with the whole Submen Rising sort of background, and that turned out to be very filled with humanity and sex.
And I'm thinking about the rules, however, are rather light on that stuff.
Yep. Oh, definitely. There's nothing.
Right.
It's all in the background. It's
Yeah.
partially, which of the templates you end up picking, which of the archetypes that you end up with. And we had a Bane, which was essentially bioengineered sex slave who wanted to become an accepted part of humanity instead of a outsider. And that led through all kinds of interesting paths to get to there.
I'm actually pretty interested in that as an excellent example of no, there aren't rules, but there's a hell of a lot there. And
right, just having.
Well, there can be, depending what I mean. It's a big setting, so you could pick around it and not do it. But,
no, I understand that, but I'm also interested in comparing it with Rokugan, Legends of the Five Rings, and a few of the other games that I was mentioning. When I say it's not there, I mean in a very positive not there way. I mean a very actively not there way that's hard to describe, where trying to put it into play, you're very obvious. Somebody would look at you and say, "Are you putting sex in here?"
You're trying to be discouraged,
right? And I don't think that I'd have to go back and look at the text to see if there's anything I can really put my finger on that I could identify as the active piece of the game design and play. But I know
feel like
go ahead.
A lot of the games. I feel like a lot of the games of that era had these sort of disclaimers and text about if any of the players are uncomfortable, then you manage these emotions and expectations and that kind of.
I was when you said that earlier, I was trying to think of any examples, and nothing really came to mind. But if you find one, like if you just find one.
Oh, did I
see
say it before?
Yeah, well, yeah, a little bit.
Where?
But if you upon reflect, it's one of those things where after we have this conversation, you sit up in bed and say, "Oh yeah, right." So if you do,
I'll do some digging and see if I actually.
Because I think you're right, but I'm just kind of curious about examples would be helpful in my mind. Anyway, guys, thank you very much. Thought provoking, and I hope that we don't. I hope we don't. Claim to anybody that this was immensely profound, but I'm actually really interested in what people might come up with in the comments, and particularly those situations in which it's present as a feature, but a lot of characters aren't doing it, and a lot of characters choose not to. I'm just kind of, or the group says, okay, that happened, and zoom, not because we were squicked out, not because we were offended, not because we were PG-13, but just because we were happy with the presence and move, and when we go with it, So yeah, that it's that kind of, for lack of a better word, that more veiled and relevant version that it makes me interested. Anyway, good to see everybody.
Okay.
Rod, wonderful to meet
Good
you.
to see you.
Yeah,
it's nice to meet you.
All right, everybody. Good night.
Okay.
All right.
Good
Good
night.
night.
Thanks again.
Yeah.